interesting graphics here to show you what continental coastlines would have looked like. There was an article that I was reading recently about Aborigines and Aboriginal tales.
My second time going live. Really enjoying that. I'm gonna have a model characteristic and sleep may be nearly impossible.
Sea levels.
I'm gonna rain dry occur. Irregular cycles could be chaotic. You're enough.
These
or
traditions
immobilized. No.
just beyond valuable. Up until very recently, they have been considered basically just, interesting in the anthropological or psychological sense, but had no real hard scientific credibility. Now I think we're beginning to reevaluate. There's an archaeologist by the name of Massey who's been doing some very interesting work for the last 20 years, analyzing many of these ancient myths and realizing and putting out there the argument that these myths and these legends and these epic tales encode really hard scientific information that we can extract from them. And talking about global changes and astronomical events and so forth. And I've been a believer in that for a long time, and this is one of the premises of Graham's work is that the myths and the legends actually have a great deal to teach us beyond just the psychological orientation of our ignorant pre-scientific ancestors.
Conceptual criteria may have covered outdoor
when we look at this graph, basically what we're seeing here is that coming out of the ice age, you can kind of see that we're coming up here, and then we have this first massive spike of warming,
like a balloon
and then
that has lost
seesaws back down into this full glacial foam. This is called this period between these two green areas directly from the atmosphere, which is named after a polar wildflower that had disappeared in northern Europe and then suddenly came back again. It only grows in polar environments. Dryas occidentalis. So the younger Dryas compared, because there was an older Dryas too.
All the effects of
now the dates are placing it from roughly 12,900 years ago, give or take a few decades, to 11,600 years ago. So this spike of warming right here is 11,600 years. Now if we look at the next one here, this graph basically goes to a different realm of evidence. And what this shows is the average, the rate of sea level rise. You see, now oceanographers and marine geologists have been studying. There's a number of different ways they can correlate this information. They can look at actual evidence of submerged shorelines, right? They can look at changes in the flora and the fauna that have lived in the oceans. They can look at coral reefs. There's a lot of different things that they can pull together to see how rapidly sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age. And again, a generation or two ago, the assumption was that there was a smooth continuum rise that took tens of thousands of years, right?
The body area,
minus 400
the
feet up to what we
radiation,
are now at the
the
present level.
context
What this graph shows is that there were two massive spikes of meltwater introduced into the oceans, into the global oceans at the end of the last ice age. And you can see the first spike, called Meltwater Pulse 1A, is the biggest, followed by another one, Meltwater Pulse 1B. If we go back to this graph right here,
even
those
50
two
years
spikes
ago,
of glacial meltwater and sea level rise coincide with this warming spike and that warming spike. And you can see how this warming spike seems to be the most intense,
except for those top
followed by this one. And we see that Meltwater Pulse 1A is the biggest. So what this is showing is that the rise in sea level was not smooth. It was like and then whoop again. So there was something that caused all those glaciers to melt within just a very short amount of time. Geologically speaking, yes, a geological instant. Exactly. What's further interesting is when we look at this graph, this is the late Pleistocene mortality graph, and each square represents a fossil specimen of an extinct mammal.
No subject.
Could be a woolly mammoth, could be a giant ground sloth, could be a saber-toothed cat, could be the giant cave bear. Roughly 120 species of mega mammals that lived during the Ice Age when
before
extinct,
proceeding.
right, at the end of the Ice
Solar
Age.
kits,
And basically, what this
soundboard
graph is showing us
to
here
use for
is
the
that
outer layer,
you probably
wrap
can't
steel
read this
wool
here, so I'll
pads,
interpret it for you. If you go back to here,
celluloid
the left
spots,
side represents
added
50,000
to the
years
cover
ago.
of the steel wool.
And here,
Cut
where
6
the
ciliac
cursor is, that's
takes
40,000
damage
years,
with the following
30,000,
dimensions.
20,000. And you see
This
that
box.
as we're going along here, each one of these squares represents the finding
Step
of a
yes.
fossil of an extinct
Placing
mammal
new layer of
in the
fiberglass
fossil
on
record.
top of
What we
previous
see
steel
from
wool
this
layer
graph
and
is that when we get
other
to
layers
between
steel wool
11
on
and
top of that.
13,000 years ago, there's a
The
massive
stronger
spike
fear
of
of
mortality.
different
Shoots
wool,
through the
steel
roof.
wool.
This
Again,
demise of these animals
galvanized.
directly coincides with this right here.
Flame
Directly.
retardant.
The
Fire,
first time I
fish,
shifted,
housing.
I didn't become a wolf. I became something that eats
Building
wolves.
ideas.
Now,
He's
what we're
building
dealing with is that
ideas.
for 50 years, the dominant theory has
Removable
been what is
pins
called
with
overkill or
hinges.
blitzkrieg.
His
And this theory
vandalism got the
basically
top
states
and
that
bottom.
bands
Once
of
we have a
Paleo-Indian
look
hunters came across the Bering
in a
Land
similar
Bridge,
manner, the
slaughtering
accumulators
every
have
animal
now
that they
been
encountered
quite
along the
sturdy,
way,
and it's
and
almost
somehow
complete.
within less than 1,000 years
Okay,
swept from
but they
Siberia
would be
down to
quite
Tierra del
cold
Fuego
to
and killed off every mammoth in the
fabric
world,
that is cushion.
and presumably every other of the extinct mammals. And that has been the dominant theory that humans
Artifacts
caused
used
this
by
mass
the
extinction.
cushion.
And
Facts.
personally, I think that's just absurd.
Intending to
Because
control
for one
these
thing,
factors, the
based
34
upon anthropological
double-blind
studies, there were
divided
possibly more woolly mammoths in the world than there were people for a
possible
while.
wanted to establish
You
a
have to assume that the
standardized
blitzkrieg was so instantaneous and so all-encompassing that there was no time even for the mammoths to reproduce.
psychophysiological initial
The
level.
overkill hypothesis basically addresses itself only to woolly mammoths.
Never heard that term.
Woolly mammoths were one species of 4 different species of mammoths. What
Psychophysiological
about the
initial
other roughly
level.
120 species? What about the giant armadillos and the giant
Psychological
beavers and the American Pleistocene
initial-
lion that was as big as a horse? The list goes on and on and on and on. And these animals all basically disappeared during this spike that you see right here. And that spike falls exactly between these 2 warming spikes and between the
Figure
2 sea
2
level
changes
rises.
in
So
body
all
cut
the
temperatures.
It all points to the same
Yes.
time period.
Yes. And so what I'm saying,
that-
and this is
changes in body core.
basically consistent
course
with
set.
what Graham's saying in his book, is that
Feels good.
this what we're seeing here, this
Feels
episode basically
strong.
represents a
The
curtain that
sources
has
of
come
air
down and
set
obscured
ravine
150,000
artifacts
or more
have shown
years of deep human
different
history,
thing.
and basically has lost that history
The
to
back
modern
brace,
perception.
a
But
double-blind
now,
study
once
has
we
shown
understand that, you know what,
history
the
nature
uniformitarians
of
were wrong to reject all
standardized
ideas of catastrophism. Because
Water.
in the early days of
Would
geology,
be
the founding fathers of
hinges,
geology
the
were
swing,
catastrophists.
the
They went out into the
composition,
field
accumulated
unencumbered by dogmas
Celiac
and
textbooks,
doctrines and so
drill bits,
forth.
but
They
not
looked at the evidence in the field and concluded that there had
not
been
perfectly
catastrophic
fit.
episodes.
A
And this
lot.
is, Baron von
No.
Cuvier, Sedgwick, Murchison. If you
It's
go back,
time.
all of these guys who basically are
It's
considered
like a
the godfathers of
football.
modern
No,
geology.
no.
They were, to a man,
The
catastrophists.
The tails,
James Hutton, Lyle, and Playfair came
make it
along
visible
and basically
never make
proposed
such a
the idea of
claim to
uniformitarianism.
sexual
The present is the key to the past. Very powerful working
illegal for you to
idea
do
is
these
that we can
things.
look at stuff that's going on today, extrapolate
Understand,
backwards,
however,
and try
that
to figure
forces
out
within the
things that
medical
happened in the
community,
past when we
pharmaceutical
don't have
industry,
an
and government
eyewitness
are
account,
hard
right?
at what
Very
to
powerful.
make it
But
illegal
what
to do
happened
these
was
things.
it became so entrenched as
For you.
dogma that anybody who
Illegal
invoked catastrophes was
For
considered
everybody.
basically
wedding
fringe, because
feast
in the
is
early
here.
days, some of these guys, like Sedgwick, for
should
example, he was a
preach
theologian,
the
he was a
good
traveling
news
minister
and
who went
can't do
around
much harm.
in his travels to convert
We'll bring the cannon.
people to
I found it
Christianity.
was
He would
very
see the stuff, and he
entertaining.
would,
On a
place it
hanger
within the
in
context
an
perhaps of
alley
being
place.
Noah's flood, right? And they would
I
place
did
it
not
in,
need
some
the
of them,
need.
not all, some of them would place it in a
I
biblical
wanted all
context,
God
right?
blanket
So
for needs.
when they were
Around
attacked,
102 degrees.
basically the
They
substance
tried-
of the attack was,
is
well, you
to
guys
try
are trying to
object-
bring us back to the
your
days of
question.
biblical literalism. in science has moved
amazed at
beyond
this
that.
condition.
We're not here. We don't want to talk
Still,
about
we have lived
catastrophes or great floods, deluges.
inside
We're through talking about all of that.
the
That's all been
accumulation.
discredited. And what you see is between
I
the
think
early
how
1800s,
story does not end
with
here.
the beginning
Still,
of geology, earth
we
science,
have
to
lived.
about the 19th century, what you see is a steady decline. You know, some
Fact
of
the
the older
farmer
guys die off.
survived
They're
the death
replaced by the new guys who've now
sentence
basically
the town's
taken
most
control of the
reputable
university
doctor.
curriculums, and they've
I'd
been
had
indoctrinated
even
into this idea
tried
of a
in
strict
spite of that death
gradualism,
sentence.
and that any
It's
deviation
cause
from
of
that strict
considerable
gradualism
interest
is
and
heresy,
discussion.
basically. So
Presently,
by
I've
the
been
time we get to
told
the
there's a
20th
shortage
century,
of
you
steel
had this
or
reigning
drums,
uniformity,
fiberglass,
reigning
and steel
gradualist
wool in that
dogma
town.
that had been imposed
As
upon
the
all
man's
earth
friends and
science.
neighbors
And anybody who
were
deviated from
very
that was
busy
immediately
building their
kicked
own
out of the club.
accumulators.
And this is why when J.
Oh
Harlan
God,
Bretz
shooter,
came
oh
along in
God,
the
war.
1920s and proposed that there had been these gigantic floods in the Pacific
Shallow
Northwest,
restoration.
you know, the geological community
See
basically
the
said,
open end of the
get
test tube with the rubber stopper. Whitaker tape it shut.
There's nothing called test scheduled with rubber stopper.
Solo, are you on it?
out here. We
Tikapaka,
don't want to hear
are you
about
on
it.
it?
We know that that couldn't have been.
The one should never be
because we know
allowed.
J. Harlan Bretz continued
To
to
it, yeah.
document, exhaustively document
Ever,
from the
right?
field
That time,
that these
that's
floods were
stop
very
letting
real.
blow.
His critics said, well, you
Wipe the
can't provide a
glass.
source for these floods,
Super
therefore
pro
they didn't happen.
alcohol.
Now bear in mind that all of his critics, his
As the
most
distance
vocal
of the body
critics,
suffers from
had
the
never
metal
even gone
walls
out
and
to
creases,
actually look.
there will be a
Right?
reduction in
And
effectiveness of the
Graham is
accumulator.
going to, he has got a
Height
great
sitting
section
erect
in
in
his
a
new
chair
upcoming
about
book
3 inches.
describing
One
the
side
ordeal
of
that
each
Bretz
roof
was
frame
put
is
through.
fixed
He
with
finally
galvanized
prevailed,
steel.
ultimately.
The other with silicate.
Most of his
And
critics
3
died off.
alternating
You know,
layers
he
of
outlived, he lived
fiberglass
to be, I
steel
think,
wool are
98.
sandwiched
So
in
I think when
between.
he was 96, he was given the Penrose Medal, which is the
It has an
highest honor
error
in
in
geology. And
calculations.
he said he was
Now is the
very
time to
grateful, but
find
the
out
only thing
before the more
he was
expensive
unhappy about was the
Celotex and
fact that
galvanized sheet metal have
all of his
become,
critics had died off, so he
and
didn't get
should
to
be
gloat
carefully
over
selected to
them.
meet their
So,
needs.
so what
We'll
happened was
face
you had
upward
the younger
in the bottom of
geologists
the
come in who were
Celotex
more
box and should be
open to that.
covered
And
with
what you see is
steel
between the 1950s and
to be used for the
1960s,
final
you have a
act.
transition going on where
Saying
they're
that
beginning to accept
political
that these
mass
great
we
floods had
wanted
happened.
construction
But
to avoid
what they did
breathing
was they took a modern
fine steel
example,
dust.
which is glacial outbursts floods, which
Forces
we
within the
witnessed
medical
dozens and
community,
dozens, probably
pharmaceutical
hundreds of
industry, and
cases in
government
ice,
are hard at work to
particularly
make it illegal
Alaska, British Columbia, the
restore
Himalayas,
our
where you
sexual
have,
potency.
particularly going back to the Little Ice Age, when the glaciers began to recede in the mid-19th
Accumulator,
century, you had a lot of what
and
are
so
called
forth.
proglacial lakes formed, or
Clear
lakes,
body,
bodies of
rain.
water held in by the melting ice.
Want
And
to
then
give up
eventually the
the
ice
group
gave
B
way and
near
the
the
water rushed
TV
out in the form of
to
a flood.
suffer
The
the
Icelanders
iceberg.
call it a Yokalaups. Okay,
Pointed
so
at
we have a
dark
modern
light
example. So
form.
what they did
Floaters,
was in the
fog
60s
like
and
form
70s
of
was
the
they said,
energy.
okay, guess what? We've
Darkness
got
and
now evidence that there was a
semi-darkness.
huge body of water,
Presence
a
of a
huge
strong
lake in
or
western
cloud
Montana.
charge.
And it was held in
As
by an
in
ice
the
dam.
case,
That ice dam gave
accumulators
way.
are present,
All of this water
intensified
gushed
by the
out over
presence.
Idaho and in southeastern
Group
Washington
B in a
down the
location
Columbia
away from
Gorge to
the
the Pacific
accumulator,
Ocean and caused
completely
all of this
uninvolved.
amazing erosion and
Also
sedimentation
affected
that
him,
Harlan Bretz was
particularly
documenting.
those by Jutta
Never mind that we
Espanta
have to
of
extrapolate up 3
Portugal.
orders of magnitude from modern examples, right? Never mind that the modern
Is
examples
the
are utterly
organic
minuscule compared to what Bretz was looking at. That has become
Am I
the dogma
gone?
to explain
I
these
was sitting
floods.
inside
It
in
is
the
still
computer
the entrenched dogma as we
will
speak
make a
now.
person more
I am
sexually
trying to
potent. Is this
demolish
true?
that dogma. I want to show
I'm
that
not
these
free
floods were something much
but to
grander
vitamins
than they ever
that take
even
protein bars
imagined,
without
and that the
asking the
source of
doctor
them
or the
was
police.
not actually a big glacial
So
lake,
right.
but was what Bretz
You could be
originally
used for
theorized was
sexual
that there was something that caused a rapid melting
and
of
he
the
had
ice.
condition.
But then his critics said, well, there's nothing that could melt the ice as fast as you're requiring for your floods. So again,
Violence
your floods didn't
or
happen.
raining
But his floods did happen,
overcast
and they were on an enormous, inconceivably
published
vast
report.
scale. And this is what
Sections
I was
of
taking
details.
Graham out to see
Possibility.
firsthand, because I felt like for him
The
to
loss.
really
The
have a
devil
handle on this
to
this information and this
is
insight into the catastrophes that basically would have
form
terminated his
physics.
other civilization, as he called it,
Yeah,
that he
but
should see this stuff in the
Einstein.
field for himself. Because,
PhD.
as they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Mr.
Well, going out in
T.
the field and experiencing
Don't
this
vanish.
directly is worth
We'll
1,000
give you a
pictures.
rate differential.
And so he's
We begin to
going to incorporate that
disintegrate. Anyways,
into his book.
and you
And I
know
would
what?
like to say about
It's
that
no
book
wonder that the
based upon what I know
mutilating
and what he's
surgeries
shown me,
and
a
toxic
bit of what's
chemical
going into the
treatments
book,
advocated by cancer
I'll
specialists
proclaim
today
without
do not have any greater
equivocation
benefit to
that I think
patients
it's
than the
probably going to be
treatment
the
of
most important book
30
that's come out
or
in the
even
21st century,
50
because
countries
it's opening a window
ago.
onto this story like no other single
Right.
source of information, credible information.
Oh,
That's a big
I got
statement.
upset.
This whole thing is so
I should have to go.
asthma
I should go.
first appearance.
I'm
This
already.
chart especially.
Yeah, I'm going. Okay, bye. I like it. Can I save the video? Can I save the video, YouTube? Can I save the video? Will I be able to use it?
Uneaten mammoths where there was thousands of them that had died.
Is it just for you, YouTube? I've seen other people post their lives. How do I get to the setting that does it? I'd like it if somebody answered. Maybe they come around.
The field evidence
I hear they
is
got a big
consistent
team.
with that idea right here. This is an example. This is one
Up
of
to
the
7,000
mammoth cemeteries. And
could
what
enter the
happens is that
room
you can see
at
here
any
that
given
you can see
moment
from these shorelines here
to
that there was a
answer
flood.
certain
The
questions.
river rose up to this level.
What's up,
And then when it
Mr.
rose
T?
down, it left this in its
What's up,
wake.
Mr. T?
And what you see here, like this is
On
bone
the
count
accumulated
here at
handbook,
the Baralik Mammoth
I finished
Cemetery in
reading
northern
those
Yakutia,
sections.
Siberia. Identical deposits are found throughout
I
the
want to keep
Taymyr
the
Peninsula.
recording.
And what we see here
If you
is
don't mind,
these
you
massive
two,
bone deposits that have been
can I have a
showing
way
up for the last couple of
to
hundred
retrieve
years.
those myself?
Every time that there's
Or what?
a thawing or a flood,
Have you
these
failed
things are washed up on
to
the shore of
do
the Arctic Ocean.
basic
What we see is
things?
that there
Your
were huge herds of woolly
client
mammoths grazing
will call
over now.
ourselves your
The
client.
plant material is only 2 inches high.
Is that true?
So clearly, it
Yes.
was a completely different climate.
This
there.
one's for you,
What's interesting is that you
YouTube
had
team.
in Siberia able to support herds
I'm
of
here my
woolly
second
mammoths.
time live.
At the same
What are you
time,
broadcasting?
that half of North America is buried under 2 miles
What are
or
you
more
broadcasting?
ice.
How is that
Mr.
possible?
T
Just a
and
totally
the
different
AG
atmosphere.
Still puzzling over that.
in
I
a
have some
literary
ideas, but,
form.
until I can
That's
test these ideas a
I
little
want to
further.
go.
So without an ice core samples, is it
retrieve all my
impossible to
files.
figure out what the temperature
I'm
was in
calling
Siberia at that time?
No, they can figure
a
out basically
courteous
based upon fossil
team.
plant remains.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that in some cases the tree line was hundreds of miles further north than it is now. And that's clearly,
Make
if you've got
available to me
trees, forests
through the
growing
app,
now,
you
where,
know,
13,
for
14, or
comprehensive
15,000 years ago it was permafrost. You know it was warm.
sharing and applications.
I recommend Resilia oil of oregano. It's made
If
in
you
the
can hear
USA,
me,
third-party tested, and the
I
highest
know you're
concentration
there.
available. 85.
If you can hear
So there's still, whoa,
me.
what is that? 19th century scene showing ivory floor of the
hear
London docks covered by thousands of mammoth tusks from Siberia. This
Can
is
you hear
a
me?
drawing, obviously.
Yeah.
I can hear
Predates
you
photographs.
now.
Yeah. For hundreds of years,
How does this
thousands of mammoths, entombed
Everyone would
mammoths
be
and
the end of
mammoth
these things,
tusks
huh?
were being exhumed
God love
from
the
the
meaning of
Siberian
these words.
permafrost.
Trust property,
Thousands
no
and thousands
trespassing.
and thousands of
And then
these.
you know something,
And,
right?
and basically,
Or
to
even
me, you
don't
look
know
at this is
a lot.
just in-your-face
You
evidence
could
that this
still-
was not humans
Who's
doing
got my
this.
other
It was not
hands
humans that were slaughtering
in their
these
pockets?
mammoths and burying their remains.
Yeah.
The instantaneous
They're
nature would almost,
listening.
it would almost be like people had figured out
Dumbo's
some new
big
thing.
ears.
Like they figured out some
Good
like
night.
a doom gun, you know, and they shot
I
them.
love
The
it.
doom gun. Well, look at the
I
near
love
extinction
it.
of American bison. What
Right.
brought
I
that
love it,
about?
you two.
Trains
Shot.
and
Good night.
high-powered rifles. Right. It was a
Shot.
technological,
Good night.
major technological advancement
You
that was able
too.
to bring about
What are you doing
near
with our user
extermination of the American
There's
interface,
bison.
actually a guy that I'm going
I'm
to
just
bring on the
trying to
podcast soon
start
to
all
discuss
over
that. His name's
again.
Dan Flores, who spent his
Just trying to start
a big
all
chunk
over
of his,
again.
intellectual
And
career
somehow
studying this. And
they
what
like
he
to
believes is
prove
that
up
the bison
that they
had a
prove it.
massive population
The tower.
jump that was directly
let them
correlating
be.
to smallpox epidemic, the Native
But why
American
do
people.
they have to block
And that
people
when
like
the
me?
United States,
Oh,
when
because
we look at the United
they've
States
been locked
history,
in school.
and the big stacks of woolly mammoth skulls,
They've been
excuse
locked
me, the
in
big
school.
stacks of bison skulls we always look to, like that was a very unusual population of bison that existed because the
I
Plains
guess they're
Indians
infected.
had experienced this massive
But have
extinction
they been
event. And then
officially?
when they had incorporated
Have
the
they been
horse,
known about a
like the
fishing?
horse and the apparently the American Indians, Native
I told
Americans
my
rather,
parents
were on their way to
the nature
extirpating
of
the
these
bison
things
even before we came along.
was
But
not
then they
tell us
died
that.
off in this massive
I'm not
death
made for
scenario with the
pussy,
smallpox and all the different
See,
diseases
Gandhi.
that the Europeans had brought
Financing.
over here. And then the mammoth population, or excuse me, the bison population had grown like
See,
almost
Gandhi
unnaturally. It'd been
financing.
much larger than it had ever been in the past.
Gandhi.
And that's when the
What
United
is
States was established, and that's when
vouchers anyhow.
all the Western European immigrants had come along
They
and started
need-
killing off all these bisons. It's
cut
really a
costs.
very interesting subject, and
It's an
But
interesting idea. And it's
Burdensome
plausible. I
employees.
haven't looked into that.
What are they then?
You know, I
What are we?
assumed, and maybe
Subcountry
wrongfully, but I had
people?
assumed that the bison population had
Do
been
what?
relatively stable.
The news.
I am not convinced, though, that
Right.
there was
They
this
were
massive
occupied
die-off of
very
the Native
much.
American population yet. I'm not
I
convinced.
did
Maybe,
learn
well, because
occupations.
I haven't looked into
That
it
didn't
yet,
help us.
But, you know, one of the things
We
I've
had
seen
occupational
is that,
skills.
the assumption there is
They
predicated
don't go any
upon the
farther than
Europeans
that.
arrived and brought the diseases
Who needs the end of the age
Native Americans
order?
had no defenses for. But the thing is that
Better
there's so
need-
much evidence now showing that there were lots of
The Lord Jesus Christ.
explorers and immigrants to the New World prior to
Leviticus
the
is,
arrival of the Europeans.
but
Whether it
it's
was the
too late.
Chinese, the Phoenicians, and I'm not necessarily
I
saying that's
agree with
credible,
that,
and none of it's been proven, but there's some interesting data out there that suggests, and there are a
Because,
number of books
Rick-
written that, again, I haven't accessed it. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm an authority on that, because I'm not. But if some of that turns out to be credible, it would suggest that there was a lot more interaction between the Native
7,000
American
people have been
population
killed.
and other groups around the
That's
world,
so
which, if
Keep it
true,
alive. It seems like that.
to me kind of somewhat
Maybe-
undermines this idea that they were
Maybe that virus.
completely susceptible
They're
to
not
the introduction of these
Stop.
to these foreign diseases. But again, I've
They
got
won't
an
accept
open
that
mind. I'll wait and
themselves.
see. I'd like to see what he says. I'd like
They
to
would
hear
call it fraud.
his ideas.
For anyone interested, he has a paper in the Journal of American History. It's called Bison
What happened to
Ecology
that? They
and
call it
Bison
fraud.
Diplomacy, the Southern
Jason.
Plains from 1800 to 1850.
They call it
I just looked for
that-
it online. There's a preview that's
By
available,
fraud.
but to download the entire paper
What is it?
or book, I'm not sure which one it is, it's $19.
Yeah, and what journal is it in?
The Journal of American History from September of '91. And like I said, he's working on a new book right now.
Let there be no
and,
extortion.
I'm trying to get him to come in, but it's
The
just
vehicles-
very difficult while he's in the middle
5
of
mile per hour
You said
limit.
September of 1991.
yeah.
Yeah, I can probably access it.
Dan Flores
You
is his
private,
name,
public,
and
private.
just the information that I
It's
got
here what I
about it
said.
is pretty mind blowing.
I said to the
But,
public,
Sounds
private,
interesting. I want
private.
to know more. Thank
But
you
it's
for
small,
that, Joe.
big
Yeah, please.
technical care.
Now let's go back to that photo that you
I
have
said,
on
yeah,
your desktop
just
that you
out
were
of
going to
the sun.
explain to me,
Yeah.
but we decided not to talk about it before the podcast because it's so incredible
Creepy.
that you said this incredible change that we're looking at, the
Keeping
geological structure,
What am I
all
keeping
that
here?
took place within just a week.
Have you seen their attitude?
Let's go.
What am I
to
keeping?
this. I've got to
Man,
come to that.
Get tax expertise without hidden
It's
fees.
good to see you.
Switch to a TurboTax
Yeah, go
expert
there.
for
Like a
$150.
fly. Oh, that's cute.
Save by the
That is
fees.
cute.
Match with a trusted expert to handle your
Is it
taxes.
a continue? Oh, perfect. Let's go.
All returns, all
Let's
tax
gather.
situations. $150.
All the recordings
All in. No
are
surprises.
there.
Now this is taxes. To a TurboTax.
Aztec Teconin.
This is a satellite photograph taken from about 500 miles up. And what you see here, this is southeastern Washington. What you're
major
looking at
great
here
things
is
given
part
to
of what's
James
called the
Webb, the
Columbia
boys.
Basalt Plateau. This is part of the
James
terrain
Webb, the boys.
that we crossed when I was with Graham. What you see here is that you have an area of...
Oh,
if
they
you
have
look here,
that kind
you
of
can
mic
see the
telescope.
oh,
So there was all
differentiate
sorts of
between the pixels and the actual squares.
music
Like you see this red area
to
down
be
here is
seen
area that's
in
actually being
museums.
farmed, and it's because this is an infrared
Text to
photograph,
be
and so
read,
what happens is that
be
the
well
areas
known.
that are being cultivated will show up warmer than the surrounding areas. This whole
Let's
plateau is
compare
covered in this stuff called loess, L-O-E-S-S, and it's a type of very fertile soil that has a rather mysterious and controversial origin. We won't get into that right now, but in some places this loess layer is hundreds of feet thick over a dark basalt bedrock that is the result of these massive outflows of basaltic lava
These haystacks
that came out, that extruded between about
When you
6
hear the
million
hay,
and 16 million years ago, right? The hot spot that was the ultimate origin of this basalt is now where Yellowstone is, which so you can make that connection here. The Yellowstone supervolcano, yeah. What you have here is that you have the lighter areas is where this loess topsoil still exists. And the darker areas is where the underlying dark basalt has been showing through because the loess was washed away. So what this is your typical, the geological term is anastomosing, and basically that means a branching. Flow pattern of the water, and you can see that very clearly here, that the water came off of this river, which is the Columbia River up here, and flowed over the landscape and washed away the basalt and left these gigantic channels in its wake. And there's more over here to the east, there's more over here to the west.
I love you, Raw.
And if we look at
I love you, Raw.
let me go to a different program here. I think
7,000 addressed to you.
That actually I think has the picture in it that
the
you
18
are
from our
seeing.
Mr. T.
Now, what we're looking at here is what's been called the Missoula Flood, right? Named after the town of Missoula, Montana. Missoula is in a basin
what we
that was
got to
part
do.
of this hypothesized
We need a
giant
yellow
lake
vest song.
that presumably caused this flood,
The
right?
red boys happiest
And
men.
again, there was an ice dam.
Bring
There was this ice dam. The ice dam broke, and as soon as this thing comes
what
up, I will
happened?
be able to show you
Where
some slide. Here we
happened?
go. Let's see. Here we go. It should be coming up right here. While that's coming up, we'll look at this slide
like
right
the
here, because
door.
this will kind of give
And
you
then
a
Tina.
picture of the Earth as it was
What does it mean?
during the height of the Ice Age.
So wow, that's pretty deep. The sheets of ice go pretty far down. That's amazing.
Everybody
Canada
got
didn't
their own
exist.
body
Canada didn't exist.
around here.
Wow.
Yeah.
Poor Canadians.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Everybody got their own body.
And the ice, part of it is, a lot of in the Midwest now, a lot of, the farming belt of America is basically, growing out of the fertile soil that the ice scraped off of Canada and dumped, down in Minnesota and Iowa and Wisconsin and so on. So, someday they may want that back. But we're not going to let them have it.
It's fascinating when you look at that there was this big ice cap, but then the areas around it, no ice. And why was that?
Well, that's one of the mysteries. Again, like over here in Siberia, you can see over here, this is where all the woolly mammoths were, giant herds of woolly mammoths. And it appears like it may have been warmer than now during the ice, which is very odd.
There's some ice up there? Is that what we're seeing?
Yeah, there's some ice up there. Sporadic glaciers, but nothing like what we see in northwestern Europe. Over here, this was called the Fennoscandian ice sheet. And the ice sheet over North America actually consisted of two ice sheets. The Laurentide, which was centered over Hudson Bay, and the Cordilleran, which was centered over the Canadian Rockies. And in this particular slide, you can see here, this was the Cordilleran over here, over the Canadian Rockies, and this was the Laurentide was much bigger, see? And then there was an area between the two, right here, which has been theorized as at one point having been a
They brought
corridor
it to
called the ice-free corridor, and migrants from Paleo-Indian migrants from Siberia would have come across Alaska and down through this corridor
said
here to
something
the lower
nothing.
United States, and ultimately
The
down
top of my
here
head.
to South America. And it was that group, these groups of
They said no
bands
school.
of Paleo-Indian hunters
Schools
that,
out.
according to the overkill or blitzkrieg hypothesis, wiped out the mega mammals as they passed by.
10 million plus happy patients and counting. I'm a sports physical therapist, and I've told many people.
Let's go bowling. The bias.
Let's see. Okay, there we go. Okay, so here, this kind of will show
The bias is in the balance.
the coastlines
Is that
of
what they mean?
of the world
Yes.
during
When they go bowling on the
Ice Age.
pristine green,
and
they throw off the balance of the ball
escape out of this
to resemble
so that
the
we
balance of a skull.
can zoom in a little bit and look at it closer.
The pristine green
Okay,
is
so-
flat,
Here would be
level.
as we
surface.
see now, and
This is modern coastline.
this is modern coastlines. And
Right.
now I'm gonna jump to, this is actually only 300 feet
The
lower
stained
now,
grass
and
skull.
quite a bit different. Let's just look at the United States, North America.
That's amazing. There's a lot more United States.
Yeah, now check this out. Okay, now here's North America as it is now, and you see up here,
Seems so
this is
buttery,
what's called,
appealing.
this is
The
the Bering
process
Strait
began.
right here between Alaska and Siberia, right? During the Ice Age, this whole area was
Conjoining and soldering.
exposed because of the lowered sea level. We'll go one slide further and you will see, take a look now, watch what happens up there in Beringia. Boom.
Wow, so it's all land.
It's all land.
Everybody
And it's
loves
connecting North America to
a lot of
Siberia.
shit like
And that's
that.
all drowned.
Wow, I didn't understand that. See, I always thought that the Bering Strait was an ice mass. I thought it was
Some of the other
during the Ice
ideas, they
Age.
had
There was
come
some
up-
sort of
Yes.
that it was ice, but it's not. It's land.
Land. It's land.
Wow.
And it's not glaciated. And it was home to these extraordinary herds of mega mammals that ranged over these
Another
thousands
farmer.
and thousands of square miles. I
I
mean, the
met
drowned
this
area is
guy.
bigger than modern Alaska.
Wow.
So how long ago is this?
Yeah.
Well, this is, right at the end, up till the end of the Ice Age. Between like 14, 15,000
What
years
river?
ago.
14, 15,000 years ago. No
Explode.
glaciers in this area. This is all just land,
As it
and there's
suppresses
animals
the
living in it. And
evaporation
people are
of
walking
water
back and forth.
inside.
Essentially,
And then the
it was a
accumulator.
continent. I mean, it was connected. It was all one continent. It was all one.
It was
Happy
all
City.
one continent.
Wow,
Fall
that's
out.
amazing.
And not the coastlines of the world. Look at Florida down here.
The upper
Wow,
edge
see,
of
it's
the
double
plastic
the width
should
of
be
the modern
nearly flush
peninsula.
with the
Yeah, it's
upper
enormous.
edge of the metal
And it's
tube.
so close to
Further
Mexico
would
too. It's almost like a
remain
little boat
about
ride.
2 inches
Now here is
below the upper
Indonesia,
edge
and
of the
where
stereotype
stories,
box.
which I don't know how credible they are, but there are
The
stories like
stereotype box
Lemuria
on
and the
the space of
Pacific and all
about
of that.
1 inch should
Again, I
exist
don't know how
between
credible
the
those are. I
sides
think the
of
Atlantis
metal
story
tube
actually
and
has a little more
the stereotype
credibility.
of
We
the
talked about that
box.
last time somewhat. But here's the modern.
As
You
given
can see
in
the
the
light
previous
blue is the coastal shelf area,
From each
right?
corner of
Now,
the
let's go back, and then you'll see
eyes,
here the enormous change.
fabricating itself.
So again,
Accumulating.
enormous areas of land were drowned by the rising sea levels. Remember
Let it
this, though,
go.
when we look at the rise of modern cities and nations, where did they first show up? Where
So
did they
yeah.
coasts? On the coasts, right, at the mouths of rivers, on the
The
coastlines.
leaves and all that.
And during the Ice Age, where would have been the
We
most obvious
remain
prime
active
habitable
and
real
many
estate?
months
Down close to sea level, right?
down
So if there were cities
facilitated
built,
by a toxic breakdown
if there were
products of
thriving
the
communities
and
during the
dyes,
Ice Age, they're
psychedelic
now 400
complications
feet
such as
under the
kidney
water.
and liver failure.
It's so amazing that all of these stories of floods, the Epic
was
of
it-
Gilgamesh, Noah's Ark,
Yeah.
that all of these
That was
stories
crazy.
seem to really correlate with all this data. I mean, they all seem to coincide.
That's
Exactly the point. It's so
emotional
weird.
problems surface.
I can't, most people would think about the story of Noah's Ark, like, oh, it's just crazy old horseshit. But most likely, they're basing it on something that happened very rapidly in their area.
Emotional problems surface.
Now, of course, we're most familiar with the story of Noah's Ark, because of the Judeo-Christian tradition. But there are hundreds, literally hundreds of stories from all over the world that parallel the story of Noah. Deucalion,
And what you will do with it.
Xisthros, Utnapishtim,
probably
Manu. The list goes on and on of these culture heroes
You'll allow it
that somehow
yourself.
had foreknowledge of this
If you
impending
can.
disaster and were able to
Somebody
take
else,
steps to preserve
come on.
themselves, their family, some diverse cross-section of species,
ask, see,
and they all have
no.
this, similarity. They all parallel.
the
Now,
way,
my way of looking at it is this. Okay, we now know from the hard
The way.
geological record
the
that
heart,
massive floods
Right.
have taken place on the surface of the earth.
It's a
Massive
heart.
floods, right? Beyond
So
anything that we've
guys,
even imagined, right?
big
Up until
God,
a decade or a few decades ago. They're real. Okay, on the
Yeah.
other hand, we have stories
Big
and myths
God,
and legends. Repeatedly, it's probably the most ubiquitous of all the stories that we've inherited from the past is this story of this gigantic
Forget it.
world-destroying flood that
Cut it
occurred,
to 3.
right? Now, on the one hand, we have the hard geological record which shows there were giant
No,
floods.
not cut the
Then
tree.
we have
These are
these epic
domesticated
tales
trees.
and myths from all over the
How
world
dare you?
about giant floods. Do we now
You can't do that
dismiss
thing
those
you
floods,
think you
those,
need to
those
do.
stories out of hand and
We
say, oh,
need
that's
to
just
treat them with salt or
superstitious,
something.
pre-literate,
The way that they,
pseudoscientific nonsense? I think we'd be making a big mistake to do that. Now,
not
if we
to
accept that those
Right,
flood
good.
stories, and
Right,
maybe they have
Amicia.
been altered through the
What
time
again?
and through the telling,
Jody's it.
represent something real. What about the other,
Is that right?
elements
kill,
of the story? The
but
fact
Amicia.
that in so many cases, there was somebody that had
If they're living in the
foreknowledge.
tree,
Do we
to
dismiss
treat the
that
tree.
out of hand as well?
Not
Or
for
where does that come from?
weevils,
That there was
but for
one
something
group of people, small group of
that's
people
like that.
saw this thing
To
coming
me,
and prepared for
such
it,
as a
and
paramecium.
others who basically
If you ever
paid
seen
no
them,
attention.
Maybe they were just preppers. Maybe there's the preppers of 10,000 years
The
ago.
preppers of 10,000
That
years
means
ago.
they're in a
That
high cycle.
explains it right there. One last slide quick here. Here's Europe.
That's sad,
Look at
huh?
the British Isles. Right, now we'll drop sea level.
sad to,
No British
I'm
Isles.
sad to
That's
death.
incredible.
See, that's what I was saying
By
earlier when we
default.
started talking. I mean, the world of 15,000 years ago was so dramatically different than our modern world that, it's almost difficult to conceive until you start looking at things like this.
And this was all
The
during the
flying
Ice Age.
squirrel.
Yes.
And so the melting of
flash.
the glaciers just
Yeah.
changed everything as we
Everything.
know it. And
Changed
this is
everything
while
we
human
thought.
beings were absolutely
But how
alive.
to glide.
Absolutely. No
Pet
question.
gliding
Human beings
squirrels.
were alive, yes.
Waiting for
Such
payday
pride.
sucks. Waiting for payday sucks. Waiting for payday sucks
Ask,
because I
seek,
have bills now.
knock.
Okay.
It is
So,
true.
We'll start looking at some of these pictures here. This is
Okay,
from
I'm
Western
getting
Montana.
with
It says
this,
in Genesis
Alright.
7:19, the waters prevailed
Don't leave
exceedingly
them
upon
out.
the earth, and all the high hills were
Cold.
covered. I want you to take a look, as you can see many mountains in
See?
western United States, if you know what you're looking at.
Everything
this on.
is on the table.
You know what those are? Those horizontal lines?
And we didn't
They
get a
look
chance to
like
set
we're
the
the
table
shore.
They're shorelines.
yet. We have a
Exactly, they're
full
shorelines.
That's absolutely what they are.
That's absolutely what they are. They're
to
shorelines.
prepare this
Reaching
meal
right up to the very tops of the
What
hills,
else were
you
we
see.
gonna
And
do?
basically what you had
for the
was you
other
had this
dinner.
enormous gush of water
who's
filling
coming
these
to
mountain
dinner?
valleys almost to the mountain
What
peaks
we will
and then
know
draining
then?
away. And as it drained away, it left the succession of
Mama?
shorelines etched into the hillside. And all along the pathway of the floods, we're going to see stuff like this. This was our first stop with Graham.
I'm
This
not
is
no man
La
for
Tourelle
business.
Falls. This is that basalt I was talking
We
about.
keep getting
Look at this
this.
stuff.
I told
There's
my
layers
parents
of this
message.
basalt.
Well, that's
They
you
don't
guys
think it's
underneath it.
I don't think in this picture. I think I took
It's
this
like
picture
how
about
God
10 years
thinks
ago.
it's
But yeah, I
funny.
have pictures of
Somebody
me
would
and
ask
Graham
him if
under
he
there.
Dude, you're so tiny. That's so crazy. It's
Yeah.
so big.
Oh yeah,
Right.
you only gotta
Now,
waste time
here's
to
what you've
get
got
in
a
a
picture,
question.
Joe.
Let's
Picture
hope
you've got
for
this nice gentle valley with a nice river, very pastoral scene, trees and stuff. Probably,
It seems like
mammoths and
they thought
herds of
they had
these
done it.
animals grazing
And then
along the side of this peaceful river with gentle
Suddenly.
valley slopes.
Suddenly.
Here comes this massive flood, and we're talking about
Suddenly.
perhaps a flood wave 800 to 1,000 feet high.
That is
coming
completely
As it
unnecessary.
comes through, it's ripping
That
up
isn't how
everything
to
in
get a
its path.
bath. You
And
lazy
what it
fool.
does is it now
Just because you
changes
could
the profile
survive
of this valley
that,
from
your
this
beach
gentle
whale.
profile to down cutting 800, 1,000, 1,200 feet or more into the bedrock, right? So now, prior to the passage of this
Oh, here
giant
it is.
flood, you had
I'll let you
streams
need
and
it.
nice little rivers flowing into the main
That's your
river,
throat.
which in this case was the Columbia. What happens is
That's
after
your
the
throat.
passage of this flood wave, it sheared off the
Pueblo.
sides of the channel. So that now,
See,
rather than a gentle slope, you've got sheer cliffs
the
400,
vultures
600 feet high.
at the front
These
desk.
pre-flood streams and rivers come up,
Apparently,
and they're now
it's
waterfalls. And that's what we're looking at right here in this picture,
true
if that makes sense to you.
request.
And you notice how you've got this undercutting here. That undercutting
To
only
support
occurs
the services
when you have
industry,
enormous, intense
we
turbulence
need
in the
an
water
upgrade
doing this.
in quality
You see,
of
the
how
water doing
they
this
do the personnel
will undercut. See,
operation.
this modern waterfall here had nothing to do with the creation of this cliff. This
Oh,
cliff
the
was cut,
breadcrumbing,
again, probably in a matter
the
of days to weeks by
national
the passage
hero.
of these giant floods. And there's dozens of these
the
waterfalls
breadcrumbing
that
thing.
are left. They're called, and these are called hanging valleys. They can be produced by
They're
glaciers, but they can also be
doing
produced by enormous, intense
immense work.
flood
They're doing
waves. This
women's
is your
work.
typical.
What do you
not,
call
wait a
it?
minute, not typical.
All
This
the
is
work that
called.
they're doing
This is a
in services
bar,
industry.
a gravel bar, but in this case, it's a
What do you
boat.
think
If
it
you've
is?
ever done any walking along a river,
Oh,
or a
great.
creek,
If you could find the
along the beach, and you've seen
non-existent
ripples
tips.
in the sand, and they're typically.
Oh, great
If you've
day.
got water that's a foot or 2 feet deep, you'll have ripples that are maybe an inch or two high. What we're looking at here is a flood
What
bar
is
that's
the-
3 miles long.
What
It's
they
up to
noticed
250
here,
feet above the
infrared
bottom.
laser
And the
is
ripples
bright
that you can see
hot.
here
It causes light pollution.
up to 50 feet in height and 350
Look
feet in
out.
wavelength.
We need to get some
This was
sunscreen.
produced
It's easy
again
to put
by
on.
gigantic flood flows. If we look right over here, that's a 3-story building you see right there for scale. Oh wow! So this gives you an idea. It's features like this that are just unequivocal in terms of realizing that this is not pseudoscience. This really happened.
And there's this date
Are you
back
doing-
for a specific time.
Yes, to this
What are you going to?
13,000 years.
So it's everywhere.
Where is it?
Everywhere. You've seen this. You've seen it geologically. You've seen it in ice cores. You've seen it in fossils. You've seen
Yes, yes.
Wow.
This is evidence of the big meltdown.
it. Has anybody ever tried to debate you on this stuff?
I would certainly welcome debate. I don't claim to have the final word on this, but here's the thing. I've interacted with a lot of
They better
geologists
behave
that are
themselves,
studying this, professional geologists that are studying this. What I can tell you is that in most cases, the geologists that are studying this, it's not it's basically something they're doing in their spare time. Most of them are
Like, what
engaged,
are they doing?
either in the energy industry or working for
Who's
government
not?
for other purposes. What you actually will see here, though, when you begin to look at the trend in the evidence,
Do
is
they
that
know
I think that
any
the
better?
geological community is
And will
moving
they
much
change
closer
anything?
to a scenario like I'm
Any
describing. And right now,
procedures?
there's actually a controversy because
What
some of
do
the
they complain
older guard is wanting to defend this
And
idea
right
of the Yokalaups, this
on
this
the file?
giant lake draining out.
What
There are
is
a group
that?
of Canadian geologists, though,
their
who are
interest
challenging
now?
that under
Whose
leadership
best
of
are
a
here?
man who may now be retired named
Whose
John
best
Shaw,
are there?
who goes back to
We're
the
looking
1980s
everywhere.
and begin
They
a
all see
reinterpretation
I
of a very ubiquitous glacial feature called drumlins
love it,
in
Yoko
Burns.
Loco.
I can show
I
you some pictures
love
of them
you
here after a
all.
bit. They're very
Keep your
interesting.
head on.
They look like inverted boat
Keep your
hulls,
head on.
and it was assumed, and they're always
head
associated with
on.
the locations of
Honk it
the
on.
glaciers and the ice sheets. So it was therefore assumed that they were somehow
Right.
created by the glaciers themselves.
All
But
right,
glaciers
that you win.
tend to grind
You win
things that
every
they're
scorpion
moving
in the
over and
flesh. You
level
got
things
it.
off and scrape contraction,
got your own
leaf
body.
striations, and all of
Yourself.
this abrasion. These
I'll
drumlins
tell
are smooth,
you.
streamlined features. What Shaw first
How
proposed
do you
back in
do?
the late 80s
How are you?
was that they had actually been produced by water flowing,
Do I sound like a
massive amounts
pictured
of water
person?
flowing
For
under the
what?
glaciers. And there's a very similar. The critic said, well, where did this water
lot
come from?
again.
And he said, well, I don't know. It must have been enormous subglacial
Mountain.
lakes, subglacial reservoirs.
I learned
The critic
again
said,
my
well, there's no
own
way
thing.
that a reservoir
Again.
as huge as your floods would require could have
Like
existed
how
under
them
the
did.
ice.
Use a
Therefore, your
tool. To use
subglacial
a
floods
tool.
didn't
To
exist.
use a tool.
And that
To
was,
maneuver
to me, the
thing.
fatal weakness in his theory was to explain where the water came from.
And running
But I think now we can't
iterations.
explain where it came from.
And
Variants.
you believe it's an asteroidal impact.
I would like
Again,
this
by
recording.
default,
This is
we look at all
my
the
personal reference
cross-section of
material.
possible explanations within the realm of
If
nature.
you
We
don't
can go
mind,
through and we can eliminate this
I
one, this
still
one, this
do.
one, this one, this one, and what we're left with is one that of itself would be fully
Abby's
capable of
copy.
doing it.
Fully capable and makes sense that it would happen instantaneously.
It would make sense that it would happen
any
instantaneously.
other
Will
sort
I
of
have
thing.
access to
So
this
is there an
recording
impact crater that
so that
corresponds
I
to this
can clip it,
timeline?
Well, that's what I'm
so
working
that
on.
I can
Try
alter
to
it,
find it.
so that
Yeah, I
I
think
can
I've-
use it
I think I've got a pretty good
myself?
idea. It's going to take some field research, and next summer,
I
planning to
gotta
do some-
research
some more field
with the
Is there an idea where
policies
it
on that
yeah,
second
I have
time
several
I got to
ideas.
go
Don't wanna talk about
live.
it. Keep it mum.
At
Don't
this
wanna
Ask
point,
a
steal
question.
when it's time
Hive
to
and
reveal it,
jive.
okay, let's do it here.
Oh, I would love that. I would love that.
Thought
Well,
I'd
you've
twist and
shown
cross.
several impact craters. You showed a bunch
What's
last
up,
time you
the
were
dog?
here. The one in Australia.
Okay.
That was, I believe you said
Don't
5,000
kill
years
each
ago.
other.
Yeah.
And of course,
He
every
got-
Hypothetically, it hasn't been proven yet because again,
Pika and
some of these more recent craters
But
of the last 10,000 years,
voucher.
some of these that have been
the body
hypothesized are
thing.
actually on the bottom of the
The
ocean. The
voucher
Burton
shut
crater that I think we
down.
talked about on
I
the
want
bottom of the Indian Ocean.
also
It's under 2 miles of
to
seawater.
use
So until
the
we can actually
transcript
get back there and do
mechanism.
more in-depth sampling
If
and
you don't
examination,
mind,
it'll be
I
impossible
still
to
do.
prove it. But
You too.
I think that the
I'm
evidence is
feeling
strongly
elite
supportive of
gourmet
that
this
possibility.
afternoon.
Maybe 5,000 years ago, there was a significant impact into the Indian Ocean
Thank you.
that could have caused.
I hope you've all
tsunami
heard
waves. Now,
this.
I actually
I could
posted one of
probably
the somebody.
fill it up. But I
called
want to
into
make
question
sure
some of the
I
things I
can
had said in the
access
last
my own
interview
material.
about tsunamis.
Thank you very
And that,
much.
that the things I
And
was saying weren't
I'm
really
gonna have to
tsunamis.
say,
Actually,
call it a night.
response to that, which is posted
And I love you all.
on the website where I've gone into great detail.
Yabe Yoko.
showing that the evidence really,
Thank you.
in the end, I think, does support the idea
Thank you.
that there had been enormous tsunamis, possibly hundreds of
Freedom, shout out. Oh,
sweeping over
I
the
couldn't
coast
read
of
it
the
back
Indian
then.
Ocean, probably
Did they
around
leave?
5,000 years ago.
I don't know.
That could have
Sorry.
been the origin of flood myths.
Gotta go.